What's happening, everybody? My name is Ryan Thomas. You're tuning into the Thomas Take Sports Podcast live on YouTube.com. Per usual, I'm coming to you live to bring you another edition of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Very excited to kick off this edition of the Thomas Take. I told you all on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you name it, that I would be on. I would be talking to each and every one of you, that join me after this or that join me while I'm on tonight. We are inching closer, inch by inch, minute by minute, second by second, hour by hour, day by day, whatever you want to call it, to the 2018 NFL Draft. And this is a draft dating back to last year that I've stated is the most important draft for the Buffalo Bills in probably 10 years, maybe even more than that, maybe even 20 years, maybe even 25 years. If you really look at what has happened over the course of the franchise, the Bills fans believe that Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott are the right two guys for the job and are right to we're right to have our faith in those two gentlemen running the show at One Bills Drive, and I would agree with that. So Thomas Take Sports Podcast starting live on YouTube. Obviously, I always like to represent the city of Buffalo and the people of Buffalo and the Buffalo Bills fans, Bills Mafia, Bills backers, whatever you want to call it. This past week, I hopped on a podcast hosted by a good buddy of mine named CJ. He's a host of a Jets podcast out of Sunset Bay, Florida. And his podcast actually was on SoundCloud and other streaming avenues. Was released today. I was on the podcast, talked in great detail about this 2018 NFL Draft and how I think things could go down for the Buffalo Bills on draft day, depending on a lot of things. So tune into that. I'll actually be posting the link on the YouTube page once I'm done with today's show. You can kind of get a listen to that as kind of the grand finale, so to speak, on today's show. I really enjoyed my time talking to him, and I enjoyed interacting with a fellow fan of another. He's got very similar interests, very similar passions to me, as same as me, I should say. That was great. So I'm very excited to post that on this channel for everybody to tune into. Very excited to get some reactions to some of the things that I said in that radio segment. So I'll put that on there shortly. But you guys could actually check it out on SoundCloud.com. If you go to the Jets Factor podcast on SoundCloud, you can check it out. It's the last episode. It was Behind Enemy Lines, which I really liked the title of that, being that I'm a Buffalo Bills sports writer, podcast host, cover them on the podcast, among many other sports, UFC, mixed martial arts, boxing, everything, baseball included. So it was awesome. I'm going to have you guys check it out. I'm going to post a link on it, but if you guys want to check it out on your own, you can check it out on SoundCloud.com without having to wait for me posting it to post it after this show. So coming to you live with a very interesting topic in today's show, two separate avenues in which the Bills could take heading into draft day. I got Sam Dubbs on. As a Bills fan, I'm just so excited that we can go and get that franchise quarterback, hopefully. Okay, so I'm going to talk about that, Sam, so hold your horses there. I'll definitely have that stuff covered. But in this episode of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast, I want to talk about two separate options that the Buffalo Bills could have went down this road with trading for a quarterback like Nick Foles, or trading up in the 2018 NFL Draft. Now, I've made myself very clear that I personally love the idea of the Bills picks that they have. They have 2 first-round picks. They have 2 second-round picks. They have 2 third-round picks, one the first overall pick in the 3rd round, the other the 32nd pick in the 3rd round. And I really like the idea of having all those picks for Buffalo to fill their roster with hopeful starters. Let's just say, hypothetically, best case scenario, they draft 6 players, they hold their picks, they draft those 6 players in rounds 1, 2, and 3, and they build their team up. You have 6 starters, best case scenario, that will be on the Buffalo Bills for at least 4 years, possibly even a fifth year with the new CBA that was written a few years back. A I actually just got a text here. Going to have those guys, that six possible guys that could be starters, for 4 to 5 years on this team. That's a huge advantage for the Buffalo Bills heading into the 2018 season and beyond. I like to have that opportunity to create, an opportunity for us to fill those holes, I should say. We have a great opportunity to fill a lot of holes on this team, and there are plenty there outside of quarterback. And I know that that's the focal point, the focal position that everybody talks about being, a position of need. The quarterback is always the main position that's talked about each and every year for almost every team, not just the Buffalo Bills. So I like the idea of Buffalo getting that franchise guy just as much as anybody. I think that that's awesome. I want a franchise guy. They haven't had a franchise guy as long as I've been around, outside of Jim Kelly, but I was, a little itty bitty baby back then. Not to date myself, but they haven't had a quarterback since those days. So that opportunity to go out and get your guy, I get where the Bills fans are coming from, and I don't wholeheartedly disagree with it, but I add this notion in talking about it. You have Eric Wood that's out. You have Richie Incognito that's retired. Eric Wood had to retire due to injury. Incognito retired for whatever reason he retired. Corey Glenn, who was, as I say, the most unavailable lineman in the National Football League, was traded away, which actually, not that he was really available, but it creates another hole that the Bills have to fill because Deion Dawkins, is he going to take that spot? But they have made some great free agency signings, and I would allude to Trent Murphy. I would allude to Marshall Newhouse. I would allude to Russell Bodine. Two of those three free agent signings, among Chris Ivory, are offensive linemen, Bodine and Marshall Newhouse. I would like to see what those guys can do. So could Buffalo end up, trading up due to the fact that they've already signed some free agents? That's a possibility, but I would love it. The Buffalo Bills held the current picks that they had, and in the last episode of the Thomas Take Sports podcast, I talked specifically about Buffalo standing firm on their picks. 12th overall, they drafted wide receiver Calvin Ridley out of the University of Alabama, who's unequivocally, in my opinion, the number one wide receiver in this draft. 12th overall for a number one wide receiver is typical. If anything, it's an actual steal. We outpriced ourselves in the previous regime by trading up for Sammy Watkins. That did not go well. This is not trading up for a wide receiver. This is taking a wide receiver at our pick that is very, very talented, if not better than Sammy Watkins was coming out of college in some aspects. So I have Ridley going to the Bills at 12, and then 22nd overall, I have Buffalo taking Oklahoma State quarterback Mason Rudolph. So they still take their quarterback that they want to be their quarterback for the future. It's just not in the fashion that the Bills fans are begging for. And I think that Bills fans just want that big name. They want that big name Josh Rosen. They want that big name Sam Darnold. And they are not willing to realize that this team has other needs that they need to fill, or maybe they just don't want to admit it to themselves. One of the two. I'm not sure exactly which one, but somewhere along those lines. They don't want to admit it to themselves. They want the big name, and they don't want to admit that this team is actually further along, so to speak, than what they thought, or than what they think. So all that aside, the Philadelphia Eagles were at a real luxury in this situation. Carson Wentz goes down. Nick Foles steps in. He does very, very well. He does big things for the Eagles and wins them a Super Bowl, becomes a Super Bowl MVP. The biggest question once the Super Bowl was over is, what is Philadelphia going to do with Nick Foles now? What are they going to do with him? They traded all those picks to get Carson Wentz. They know that Carson Wentz is the future. I know that Carson Wentz is the future. You know Carson Wentz is the future. The older lady that lives across the street from me that's in her 70s or 80s, she knows that Carson Wentz is the future of the Philadelphia Eagles and he's their franchise guy. So Foles is not going to take Carson Wentz's job, is what I'm getting at, if you can't tell. And what is the point in keeping him? Well, the point for Philly to keep him is, hey, he's proven that he's the best backup in the National Football League. He's proven that he can beat the Patriots on any given day, and even in the most difficult of circumstances, he can play very, very well. Throughout the entire playoffs, he played very, very well. So why trade him? Well, Philly asked for two first round picks. My sentiment with Nick Foles is that I love Nick Foles. I've always believed in him. I've always thought that he had the capability to be a starter in the National Football League. I thought he was tossed aside like a rag doll by the previous Philadelphia Eagles regime, which they traded him to the St. Louis Rams at the time for little to nothing. I did not, or actually was it for Bradford? I can't remember. But anyway, he was traded to the Rams. They had nothing there for him. He goes to Kansas City to back up Alex Smith, and he comes back to Philly to back up Carson Wentz, and boy, did he ever back him up. Now, people can say, well, his only great career moments were as a Philadelphia Eagle. True, but that's like saying Tom Brady's only great moments were as a New England Patriot. Now, I'm not saying Nick Foles is Tom Brady by any stretch of the imagination, but what the hell does that have to do with anything? In moments where he started and he had players around him, which I do think Buffalo has in terms of KB, Zay, Clay, and McCoy, who he's played with, by the way, obviously. I thought that would be a decent move if Buffalo traded a second and possibly one of the 2 third-round picks, maybe the third that Philly sent to Buffalo in exchange for Ronald Darby. That would be basically trading Ronald Darby for Nick Foles. Ronald Darby, Jordan Matthews for Nick Foles, in a way, essentially. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not really on board with that anymore because I know that Philly doesn't want to trade him. And why would they want to trade him? Why should they want to trade him come, let's just say, this time of year? Why would they? Like that, Buffalo? I do. So to say the least, the fact that his contract was restructured, Philly literally said, we know what you did for us. We know that you're a rare commodity. You have us in a rare situation that teams could only dream of being in. Having both Carson Wentz and Nick Foles. Teams can only dream of having those 2 quarterbacks in their quarterback room, regardless of who they got wide receiver wise, regardless of who they got tight end, running back, offensive line, bull hickey. Those are 2 very, very good quarterbacks, and any team would be very lucky to have one of those guys, let alone both of those guys. So I am all about getting a player that is experienced in the National Football League, that has played legitimate critical downs in the National Football League. And if Philly toned down their offer or what they expected in return for Nick Foles, and it featured a second and a fourth, let's just say, I would rather have Buffalo do that than trade a first in this year's draft, the 12th overall pick, the first in this year's draft, the 22nd overall pick, a second in this year's draft, possibly another first in 2020's or 2019's draft, and possibly a second in 2019's draft, and possibly a first in 2020, which is the reported rumored price for the Buffalo Bills to move up from 12 to 2. I've heard things as well that possibly if Buffalo were to move up from 12 to 2, it would take a third team for them to do it. It would be a 3-team trade, possibly. The 2 teams that I've heard, it would be the Giants, Denver, and the Bills, or it would be the Giants, the Colts, and the Bills. Could quite possibly happen come draft day. So a lot to take in there with that information, to say the least, and I hate to throw everything at everybody while they're tuning into this, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to have no first, the next, you know, 2 years basically. Um, and granted, are Philly fans asking the Eagles, what did we give up in the trade for Carson Wentz? No, because they didn't trade that. And two, it actually worked out. There's no guarantee that with the lack of positions around this quarterback that this could work out. As I said, they do have some guys that were cast offs on the offensive line, Bodine and Marshall Newhouse. I would like to see what they can do, but not with a rookie quarterback standing behind them. Feed AJ out there, throw him out there. He wants to play. I almost said EJ. Feed AJ, put him out there. He wants to play, right? He wants to play. He's played 4 career games. He wants the opportunity to play. Put him out there and let this rookie learn. Depending on who they get, I think they should go out and get Mason Rudolph. Maybe possibly move up a little bit from 22 to like 15. Take Mason Rudolph if the quarterback run becomes extremely saturated. Let's just say Sam Darnold goes first. Saquon Barkley goes second. Josh Rosen goes third. A surprise team moves into the top 5 to take Baker Mayfield, who I think could be Miami. And then they go, Buffalo's like, well, we got to get who we've wanted, get somebody. I don't know if Buffalo is very high on Lamar Jackson from everything that I've read, from everything that I've heard as well. They visited Lamar Jackson the least amount of times out of all the quarterbacks that are quote unquote in this draft. So I'm excited to say the least. If I were to pick which one I would rather have, I would rather take the vet. I would rather take the guy that just beat Tom Brady in a Super Bowl. And that's very plain to say that, but it's common sense. I don't care who he's got around him. I don't care if he's got Jerry Rice as a wide receiver. Nick Foles stepped onto the field in that game knowing that he needed to play impeccable football. Everything had to be perfect, and it was. So if you were to ask me, what would I rather do? Nick Foles in a trade, if it was a second and another draft selection, or trade the farm for a rookie, I'd choose Foles. I'm Ryan Thomas, everybody. That was the Thomas Take. Take care. We'll be right back with some UFC post-fight reactions. Peace.